I've known Crystal Richardson since she was a very little girl. I met her through her aunt, Nancy Steele, one of the board members, who's actually one of the first people I ever met when I moved to California in 1978. And uh, when Nancy invited me up to give a workshop up north. And so Crystal has grown from a very little girl to a wonderful adult who knows her language extremely well, and as well as being a pretty strong culture bearer. And she's also a graduate student at UC Davis on her way to a PhD in linguistics. So.
Aiki. Ko wara, chimi I yari shiprihesh. Ko wara, chimi I yari shiprihesh. Unless it's uncomfortable. Karijas, ko wara pipi, tie. Ha, ayuach. Pa. Ipaha. Yethuva. Kuma. Ipaha. Puya if. Puyawa. Tai. Pa. Ipaha. Karu. Ko wara. Ha, you watch. Chiminukun pakuri. La. Chiminukun pakuri. Ha, you watch. Tai pa ipaha yethuva kuma ipaha puya if puya wa tai pa ipaha yethuva kuma ipaha puya if puya wa tai pa ipaha yethuva kuma ipaha puya if puya wa tai pa ipaha yethuva kuma ipaha puya if puya wa tai pa ipaha. Whee! Yo, twatch me krish. Okay, so my presentation is called Sense to Sense, a sentence creation story. And I'm going to talk with you guys today a little bit about archival ancestors, language revitalization, and language reclamation. I'll touch on some quotes from ongoing scholarship. I'll talk about methods of education, and I'll go over a Western model of sentence making, or maybe a few. Then from there, I'll talk about making sense out of the currency of words. My sentence creation story was my process of how I learned how to make sense out of the currency of words. The first time I was at Breath of Life, and when I was doing my independent research, starting as a teenager. And then I'll wrap up and we'll do some breakout activity work and hopefully get you guys making sense out of your words and turning them into sentences as well. One decade ago, I went with my father to the National Museum of the American Indian in DC. He was mentoring a young Indian man from home, and this young man had a sister who worked in public relations as a representative for the museum. The woman was so excited that her brother was doing so well in his AOD program, she invited us to the museum for a special tour. I saw many of the old girls from home. Indian dresses, hats, necklaces, a dugout canoe my uncle had carved when he was a young man. Karu tana pakuriwut, karu wuratai payuchtaran, tana afishenwa. Kare khas wumurapa naniti, karu ko wurapa arada kumayafusas. Tana wena tihat, kare khas wuratai pa piye kuma up, tana matihara. Tana chupa ko wurapa arada up. Wakan wumurapa nanu tivtanin, karu ko wurapa aradas nanu krivransas. Puya if. Tana khati puya vhara. Nani akhwa khas wura puya vhara. Kare khas. Tana mati harako wurapa pictures, karu. Pa yamich kuma kupa. Karu yamich kuma up, tanikyati. I put this picture at the head of every PowerPoint to remind myself to slow down, to breathe and to pray, and to give life to the archived relatives. May they not be forgotten. Even though this old girl might never be repatriated, she is a teacher, and my scholarship allows her to dance again for the people. So what is language revitalization? Language revitalization, also referred to as language revival or reversing language shift, is an attempt to halt or reverse the decline in use of a language or to revive a dormant language. Those involved can include parties such as linguists, cultural or community groups, or governments. And that is my cultural and community group. We're doing some language vitalizing. So what is language reclamation? It's efforts that have flourished over the past 2 decades, and it's a process that can include the revival of a dormant language through the use of documentation and the cultural revitalization efforts of a re-emergent heritage language community. So that's all of us. Those involved can include parties such as linguists, cultural or community groups, or governments. Some of the more mainstream theories don't think that that's even a possibility. And for those theories, I say, according to the laws of physics, a bumblebee should not be able to fly. But no one ever told the bumblebee. So how does it work then? I'm doing my best with the tools that I have to try to bring together 2 worldviews in one lecture. I'm a linguist and I am an arar and nawarapa linguist wa arar. So I want to take a minute, a historical minute, to remember where we've been. The classroom has not been a safe or nurturing environment for Indigenous community members of California's children's traditional upbringing and cultural beliefs were invalidated, while boarding schools forced them to adopt the values of mainstream society. Despite the history of genocide, the people have maintained their form of education and concepts of giftedness. So some of the theory that my pedagogy professor likes to talk about is all about how the banking model of education is bad, but it's still very much alive and well in public schools. And that is a concept where every young mind and every child and every student comes to class and they sit facing forward and then they get deposits of knowledge from a knowledge bearer. But what kind of knowledge have we received deposits from? When it comes to Indian boarding schools, one of my primary caregivers growing up was Nani Atish, my gram, and she went to Indian boarding school. Now she thought as an arar and she lived as an arar because they hid her. But then when she was 13, the agents finally got her. And the school that she went to, the people who taught there, the bearers of the culture that was supposed to be transmitted to our people, all of our people, they thought about indigenous people, and one of the catchphrases was, transfer this savage-born infant to the surroundings of civilization, and he will grow to possess a civilized language and habit. At those schools, many children passed away, 40%, and there was a lot of corporal punishment. And right here you can see handcuffs that are about for a 3 or 4-year-old. How do we go from there, from genocide and from devastation, and regain our health and reclaim our languages? Nanu ararahi. It's my belief, and the belief of a lot of those who came before me, that linguistics can really help with that. So linguistics is a thing that has many, many tools inside of it. And there are these sub-disciplines that everybody on my hallway, all the professors, like you can tell, like who's the phonetician because they're in the same area. And then you can tell the sociolinguist because they are always standing outside of their offices looking and chatting with each other, looking at everybody else, talking a lot. And then there's a lot of the syntacticians, and they're usually at Pete's writing on napkins. So to review linguistic systems of measurements, I actually don't see all of these things as sub-disciplines because I'm coming from a language revitalization perspective. To me, language is the fabric of our lives, and it is how we relate to each other, how we communicate, how we build relationships, and the loss of it is how we lose our relationships. So phonetics is the study of the sounds that our mouth makes, the smallest meaningful units in indigenous linguistics. I think of phonetics like with the IPA chart and one sound, one symbol, and that is, it's a transcription or a notation, like with music notes, and that's the notation of those tiniest meaningful units that then create how we get to interrelate with each other. Morphology then is the centimeter, right? So it's a larger increment, and you're starting to look at chunks of sounds together, but those chunks and the ways in which they shift and move, that to me is all a part of language because I study and I live and I breathe language revitalization. It doesn't feel separate. So then with syntax maybe, if we're being all American and whatnot, it's gonna be the inch, because that's when we're looking at how far away and how close together certain words and kinds of words are. So we're looking at the relationships between words, and each word itself is a large, meaningful unit in the sentence, and the distances between those words is meaningful to the people who are syntacticians. And then semantics is the study of meaning or meanings embedded in the languages we speak. There are many languages that we're speaking in this room, and that's really, really beautiful. But if I think about a Western model of sentence making, and I think only about words and trying to find the notation and bracketing all of the different phrases and parsing things and whatnot, the linguist probably understood that, and everybody else is like, uh-oh, should I start getting scared? Like, linguistic science is a descriptive study of languages. It's not supposed to be a prescriptive science. It's not supposed to be, take 2 of these, add 1 linguist, and you'll solve language. And yet, to describe the relationships between words in a sentence, sometimes the linguistic format and theories can become very prescriptive. So if we think about this these models of looking at sentences, we might think about it as sort of a parallel process, a similar way to measure worth and value as students are measured when they're in the schools. And so maybe adjectives are worth a penny, and they're everywhere, but nobody really wants to use them. Prepositions might be a nickel. And then we have our nouns and our verbs, which are each different kinds of dollar. This is the way that syntacticians sometimes show the measurements, and so they take those words and they put them at the bottom of a tree, and this is supposed to show you the relationship between your noun phrases, so your nouns and the words that modify it, and your verb phrases and the little phrases that modify the verb. Within this theory, there is something called domination. So you have your sentence, which is the collection of all of your individual words added up together. And then you have like this tier, right? So the noun phrase and the verb phrase are almost like a generation. And then below that generation is the next generation. And you have all of those things which modify both your main noun and your main verb. When I think about that in real terms, maybe the sentence is cutting itself, and the last generation of language revitalization workers are Julian and my auntie, Nani Michich. Now, Julian cannot boss my auntie around, and auntie cannot boss Julian, because nobody can boss Julian. But because I come the next generation on the tree, I am actually able to be bossed around by both my aunt and by Julian. This is looking at a slightly different way of measuring these relationships and distances between various words. So the sentence and the noun phrase and the verb phrase might look familiar from the last slide, but then you start having these things called like the bar level, and then it kind of gets very odd looking here with a bunch of repetition. This is an appropriate form of notation, but at the same time, if we look at this sentence, colorless green ideas sleep furiously, the sentence itself, even though all of the distances and all of the relationships in the tree are appropriate, the sentence doesn't make any sense. So in this way, maybe there are limits to the ways in which the West looks at syntax and the relationships between words, because if you still follow all of the relationships within the tree to a T, and then your output doesn't make any sense, there's a processing glitch there somewhere. Now, this is a different kind of syntax tree, and it's a little more complex, and it demonstrates the transformation, because eventually syntacticians, according to one of my professors, he says that they were smoking a lot of weed, and so everything started disappearing and reappearing higher in the tree. So that must have been a good time, I guess, but these trees can be really intimidating. And when I'm working on them in my homework, it takes me and, the other indigenous person, speaker of an indigenous language in my class, we spend like 6 to 9 hours figuring out the homeworks. But we do, and we're doing really well. And we're making sense out of sense with this banking model of syntax. So to kind of break that down a little further, the first time I came to Breath of Life, I was completely overwhelmed. I was afraid to ask my linguist partner for help, and I was embarrassed because I hadn't been taught English grammar in schools. I was in all of the upper division courses, and they said, you can write a beautiful essay, and you're not going to need grammar anyway. So I came here, and I felt like I was at a loss. I thought I should have known things like what is a transitive verb? What does present progressive mean? And what is a preposition? That's my 2 cents. It was important to me to share with you various ways of diagramming sentences because you should know the problem of language is not solved yet, if it's even solvable. There are competing theories of syntax. There are several models to look at how words relate to each other in a sentence, and the story is told differently again and again and again with every generation of linguists. So your work contributes to the ongoing story, and you should be fearless as you find your way of looking at meaningful units in a sentence. For me, there's a different method of education, and it embraces plurality. There are many, many ways of finding measurement and gauging worth, and sometimes often, actually, it involves intergenerational transmission. So for those of you who don't have anyone to speak with yet, talk to the people in this room. There are people who've been coming here since the very beginning, and they started out lonely alonies, for instance. But now they're like a whole group, and they're language families, and we get stronger with each other, and that's a really beautiful thing. To me, if syntax and morphology and phonetics are all a part of the hard science of linguistics, and it's all a part of structure, this basket represents indigenous structure. So maybe all of these subdisciplines are something like Julian or the noun phrase, and then indigenous structure is like the verb phrase because it's how I am and it's how I be in the world, and they're equal. Neither one gets to boss the other one around. So now for some practical, I guess, tips that I can offer you. This is my process, and it's steps 1 through 7, how I created my first set sentences. We've been going around to all of the different archives, and you guys have been gathering the acorns left for you. So it's time to start planting trees. And with all of the exercises that we've been going over, and with your homeworks, and with your upcoming projects, these are the beginning of your seedlings. Like, your projects are the beginning of something that's going to bear fruit and something that's going to be alive. So gather your documentation and try to learn your brain's comfort zones. Begin to play with the words in your language. Use them and don't be afraid, because the words aren't going to judge you. Find a simple sentence, less than 5 words, and see what kinds of words it has. This is going to be your sentence template. Then take the first noun, person, place, or thing, out of your sentence template, and find or create a word list with other nouns that are similar to the noun you removed from your sentence template. Then you can insert your alternative nouns into your sentence template and use your new sentences as much as you can. You can write them, put them on your refrigerator, sing them, speak them, teach them to people on the street. They don't even have to be Indian. So I'm going to go through that again and actually show you my documentation that I was working with when that was happening. This is the Karuk language, and it is a dictionary by William Bright, or Bill. And I've gone through a couple of my workbooks and spilled some coffee on them, but like, they're still good. And I love this book, and I've been reading it since the first time I came to Breath of Life in 2004. That said, it wasn't until 2 years ago when I entered grad school that I actually started reading the linguistic portions. So I was teaching myself language and language use based off of the immersion and the data and the translations inside of the text, because I was so intimidated by the linguistese and like the grammar. I didn't understand it, and I didn't need it for what I was doing. I was doing language reclamation, and I was reclaiming some territory. So it says here, the imperative personal morphemes have no negative allomorphs. In effect, there's no negative imperative form. A construction of negative imperative meaning can, of course, be formed. This is done in at the syntactic level by the combination of the adverb haifat, don't, with an indicative verb form, etc., etc., etc. Gather your documentation and know your brain's comfort zones. If your brain starts to sort of like take you to some fight, flight, or freeze response, just back away from that for a little while, and maybe you'll get back to it in a few years, at the next breath of life. So step 2 of my sentence creation story. Know your brain's comfort zones and begin to play with the words in your language. One of the things, very much like the first homework this week, reading the data or the stories or the interactions between human beings as they are, reading through these interactions was actually very helpful to me, because that was one way. Not only did I familiarize myself with Bright's original orthography, but I was also being able to visually start to see the morphemes because of the boundaries, right? Word boundaries. So everywhere a word ended, I knew something was maybe happening in the beginning and something was maybe happening at the end, because these patterns happened again and again and again. And just by looking at the data and the translations, I was able to reclaim meaning and start talking in my language and thinking of this as my language. This is the fabric of my life. I'm putting the pieces back together, right? And in that way, we have a lot of autonomy, and we're really powerful people. So I chose a sentence here, sentence 3, Has uripi kunwik. Step 3 is find a simple sentence, less than 5 words, and see what kinds of words it has. This is your sentence template. So, Has uripi kunwik. Has is then, karijas, 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 uripi, net or nets, and that's your person, place, or thing happening in the middle here. And then we have kunwik, so they wove it. And that has kun, our pronoun, with our verb right here, kunwik. And they wove nets. Take the first noun, or you can also do this with the verb. And as you get more and more familiar with making new sentences, you can sort of play with other parts of your sentence as well. But we're going to focus on the verb right now, or the noun right now. So you take the first noun, the person, place, or thing, out of your sentence template. And that leaves me with sentence 3, Has blank kunwik. Has kunwik. And they wove something. The next part of my process actually involved the English to Kadu translations in the very, very back of my text, right? So there's lots of lists and lots of words. And I have one grandmother who's Orthodox, like Roman Catholic, and she says that anytime that something is amiss, you go to the book, and if you just like flip it open, it's exactly what you need to read. I felt the same way about my grammar. So I would go and I would just flip to a word list. And by looking at all of the different word lists that I had, I would be like, okay, so that's like a person, that's a thing, that's like an idea or concept. And I'd see the verbs in between. And it was just looking at one page of a list of vocab words in alphabetical order. But then I could, when I look at my sentence template and I'm thinking about then something, the weavers were weaving it, right? I'm like, I can think to myself by looking at this list, if I see baskets, there's like a soup bowl and there is a water basket and there's a dipper basket. So all of these things are weavable, right? So they're possible nouns that I could put in instead of the word net, which is also a woven thing. We use the same verb for that. And so here I picked out a few of the words, like a few replacement nouns that you could use. So I have imwadam for plate or plates, and usipnuk for tobacco baskets or your medicine pouches, and then apkhan for hats or woven caps. And then I take my template, which says khas, kunwik, then something, they wove that. And I take my new nouns that I have been going over, and all of a sudden I had one sentence and a list of vocab words, and I have 3 sentences that I can use in my life, like around town. And this is the way that you grow your ability to actually use your mouth words, right? That's what keeps your language a living language. That's what means you're not studying anymore. You are becoming who you are supposed to be, like using your Indian words and your Indian mind, like to have a fleshed out identity, right? And that's a part of language reclamation. So my new sentences here are khas imwaram kunwik, and khas usipnuk kunwik, and khas apkhan kunwik, right? So now I have 4 sentences that I can use talking about weaving, and I am a weaver, so that's good for me. So the last thing, step 7, is use your new sentences as much as you can. Write them, sing them, speak them, and teach them. And that's what we do. At the first breath of life, somebody told me, "You're real chirpy, and everybody needs a cheerleader." And I thought, I don't want to be a cheerleader. As somebody else said, they said, people only want to invest in something they can win at. Are you going to be able to win at your language? And I thought about that for a long time, because being a young person and growing up wanting your language, and then becoming an older person and working really, really hard and a lot to regain your language and your fluency, it could be really lonely sometimes. But the more fluency I had, not only did I find new friends to talk to because they were just as lonely as me, but they'd been lonely for 40 years or 60 years sometimes. I had a new family that I got because of my language, and because of us being able to communicate at like the tribal reunion or at the supermarket, like people around town knew our language was still around, right? And then they started sort of seeing the Indians, because sometimes we're very invisibilized. We're very invisibilized. And because of that, you know, the younger generation and the next generation of speakers, Karuk speakers and Karuk educators, like there became a next generation. And now we have 11 people under 50 who are actively teaching Karuk community language classes and holding enrichment opportunities. And we're always on a shoestring budget, and there's no official program for our tribe, but we're doing this. And it's funny because it felt so lonely in the beginning. But I think now that I have friends and people doing the work shoulder to shoulder with me, I think we're winning. And when you win, not if you win, but when you win, there's going to be someone who comes and follows you in your footsteps. And that's why, like, around this room, there are teams and language families and friends, and like we are each other's family. And then the little ones, they just pick everything up, so they're going to be way sharper than us. We should just accept that. So if we could work on a little breakout activity for like 10 minutes in your language groups, can you find some simple sentences, and then in the documentation that you have, find a word list and see if you can turn one small sentence into 3 sentences. So the first part is going to be just find a simple sentence that's like 3 to 5 words, and we can work on that for about 10 minutes. Does that sound good? I guess one of the things that I wanted to mention was in the beginning of this presentation, we were all singing a song together. Remember? It seems like a very long time ago. And that song is one that I made for giveaway, because at home, songs, there's a lot of really important cultural sort of norms that are still very much alive and well. So not every child has a song. And if they don't have a speaker, then some kids don't get to sing Indigenous songs, because you really need to be able to sing something from your own family, or you might have to make payment, and you get in a lot of trouble for singing somebody else's song. So that song, together, Tai Pa Ipaha, means there are lots of trees. And then Yethuva Kuma Ipaha, there are lots of different kinds of trees. Puya If means behold. Puya Wa means that's how it is. Tai Pa Ipaha, there are many kinds of trees. And so that is actually a flower dance song that I can give away, and I've given it to some of the community Karuk language teachers, and they teach it in their classes. And then it's really amazing, because whenever there's a large gathering of us, or an event, or a cultural day, we get together, and some of my students who are the other teachers, and some of Julian's students, and like the whole community of teachers, like they've been able to pass this thing forward. And so it's only a collection of 3 simple, it's actually 2 sentences and 2 exclamations. And it creates a whole song that then fits into a ceremony, like the coming of age ceremony where we come from. And all of these little kids sing it, and they sing it loud, and they sing it proud, and they have mastery. And they don't have to be without a song. They don't have to be a little kid or a member of a generation that doesn't have their own song, because it's Karuk, and Karuk is their language, so it's theirs, right? So by having the ability to make your own sentences now, I just wanted to remind everyone, not only can you make a sentence, but you can make a difference in somebody's life. And that's what this is about. And this is actually a quote from one of my master speakers, and the master speaker of the Wairika crew as well. And he said, I grew up speaking this Karuk language, and I'm always remembering words. It's hard to keep speaking, but I would like to see more of our people speaking Karuk instead of English. Singing travel songs helps me keep at it, remembering my language. So these little things that we do, it helps us practice, and it helps little people never doubt that they are valuable, right? That they can measure themselves as an Indian human being. So with that, Yotwa.